I'll start again. Yeah, I'm Matt Bell, and I'm Director of Agriculture at Hartpury, University and College. And today I'm going to sort of talk about, it's a bit of my my life history as well, seeking a sustainable future for farming. It probably tells a bit about my research background and where I've been or come from. So, yeah, I'm going to start by just sort of giving my background really, which I suppose I've been doing research for over 20 years or so, but I started as a young lad working part-time on research farms. The worrying thing is though, when I worked at Macaulay and ADAS and doing sort of cover for people when they're on holidays, a lot of those places are now closed, which it wasn't my fault, but it probably says a lot about what's happened. And we had a wealth of research places or sites, and gradually those are consolidated over time. So I grew up in Herefordshire on the Welsh border, very rural area. My father was the local vet, and we had a farm as well. Eventually we gave that up, and I went to study in Scotland, in Edinburgh. That was the best thing I ever did. It opened up a lot of opportunities for me with the group there. Fortunately, we received the SAC and Edinburgh University Scottish Government funding, which I totally appreciate now, not having any of that sort of core funding to the work I do. But they were very much getting into sustainable farming and systems thinking. They had a wealth of data from long-term studies that were able to inform what you see today in terms of breeding indices for livestock, and it's hugely beneficial to them, and they're still utilising that resource with time. So after a period of time in Scotland, that took me then to Australia. I worked as a technician for a while in Scotland, then I eventually did a PhD, and then went to Australia as they had an interest in developing their whole farm systems models. These models incorporated animals, plants, soil, and climate effects. So they really were this whole system modelling, which in Australia, they don't tend to, in my opinion, have the wealth of data that we have here in the UK or across Europe. So modelling is actually quite an important part of the work they do, and especially when looking at the impacts of climate as well, and what options farmers might take to combat or adapt to climate change. So my work there was about resilience of farming systems to changing climate, also greenhouse gas emissions as well from farming systems. And then kids arrived, so we head back to the UK and to Nottingham, where I spent a short period of time delivering research projects. Then I went to Northern Ireland, did a similar thing, back to Nottingham for a teaching and research post, and then on to Hartpury to my job now. So yeah, research has been a big part of what I enjoy, but as you'll know, it's quite a challenging environment to keep working in. So we're going to sort of start off by giving a bit of background to the farming landscape, and then go on to the policy landscape as things change, transition, and then on to some sort of what I see as sustainable measures that I've looked at over time. So in farming context, about 70% of UK land is farm. A large proportion of that is grassland. I have a real interest in grassland and the value it brings, but I think it's a real undervalued resource, and also the interaction with animals and other parts of that habitat. So a large area is grassland, permanent, temporary grass and rough grazing. And then about 20% is sort of arable. And then in recent years, we've seen a sort of decline in sort of farming area as infrastructure development, building, and increasing woodland area as well, which is due to increase in the coming years based on government policy. But farming, for me, is very much protected around the suitability of that area, that location, to a certain enterprise. And it could be based around soil type, topography of the land, and the climate that determines what you might do in many cases, not all, obviously, looking at house system. The policy landscape is changing, we know that. We don't necessarily know what the detail is, really, and that will sort of pan out in the coming years. But we have an Agricultural Act of 2020 where we know public money for public goods. And one interest I have is how do we sort of quantify some of these things? How do we make it measurable in terms of the outcomes of some of the public goods? We know basic payments are going to reduce over time to 2027, and the money is going to move towards environmental land management schemes, whether that's the Sustainable Farming Incentives Scheme, Nature Recovery, Landscape Recovery, to name a few components of that. And at Hartpury Farm, we're part of the Sustainable Farming Incentives Scheme, but we keep getting emails to tell us we'll get some more information soon, and we're still waiting for that more information. But what we can see is already that the components of the Sustainable Farming Incentive already are not comparable to the mid-tier countryside stewardship that we're in at the present time. Unless the components of biodiversity, animal welfare, really start at quite sizable amounts to become comparable to that. So it's not attractive as it stands at present, but things may change. And I guess as they get feedback on the pilot studies, that will inform hopefully some of the changes. So there are lots of different initiatives. It could be quite complex for a farm to sort of follow, and they probably need support in doing that, and all the process and steps they have to follow. But the intentions are at the moment is to involve farmers from the beginning. And as I said, we're a pilot farm in some of these elements, including animal welfare that we've done already. And the funding seems to be around incentivising farmers to change what they're doing, how can we incentivise them, but also encouraging them to innovate as well. So think about, potentially investing in a new technology that might improve their decision making and the information they gain. So I'll touch on some of those bits in a few slides time. So we've come out of CAP. It had, I suppose, good intentions to increase productivity, to ensure a fair standard of living for the agricultural community, stabilise markets, provide a certainty of food supply, and ensure supplies reach the consumers at a reasonable price. It had several problems, which it never really got over. It's very much, around that basic payment. A large chunk of the subsidy that farmers got was basic payment. A large chunk of that went to larger landowners, and they didn't necessarily put that towards environmental protection. It didn't necessarily protect the farms against the market, or it wasn't very market driven at all, and didn't improve efficiency. So there are always these weaknesses or issues that I suppose the future policy in the UK is hopefully going to address some of these things, but time will tell. We'll see what happens. So our future, and I see it as lots of opportunities, because obviously it's good for me as a researcher in that area. It's all around sustainable farming and improving how we measure things on farms and improve decision making. So, obviously we're talking about a system of policy that's going to hopefully protect the environment, rural communities. We've got to focus on some of these areas around net zero, nature-friendly farming, climate resilience, food security, transforming foods, just to name a few. It's really quite broad, quite open, really quite big challenges, and but potentially exciting times and opportunities to really transform what we're doing. And I don't think it's simply about an effective environmental scheme producing public goods. We do have to make useful tools and solutions for farmers to really inform what they're doing and have that information that they need to make better decisions. So the challenge I see it as is really balancing this need for productivity with environmental and social needs, and that's something we've been trying to balance for a long time. And the Balancing Act is not always work, but maybe we're getting more information now to really address that balance. So we're never really balanced or stable, is my thought, my opinion. Any policy model, if a food needs to be economically stable, we know that, and that's what CAP tried to do, Common Agricultural Policy, stabilise the production of food, the food supply, and try and minimise volatility. But here I sort of build my little temple, so it took me ages to do this, so I have to keep using it now. So simple as well, isn't it? Oh, dear. So yeah, 3 pillars of sustainability. The trouble is that one on the right, the economic one, yeah, it's so influenced, so important. So the stability of sustainability of a little temple, and has such an influence on the environmental and social aspect. In my sort of definition of sustainability, is about balancing this productivity, profitability with a desire to preserve our rural landscape and the environment for future generations. And hopefully we can have mechanisms that can stabilise the viability of the farming business, which we already see already. I do the recruitment for the farm, and a lot of the applications for the new staff is about changes in their existing farming environment. The farm is looking to restructure, it's looking to change direction. That's uncertainty for you. It's put uncertainty in the businesses, they're trying to protect the business, and it's changing the environment, and potentially they're diversifying other means. So until we get that sustainability, that stability in the economic part of the business, financially stable of the business, then hopefully we protect the social and environmental aspects as well. There's lots of talk. I suppose we're going to talk about holistically. The regenerative farming is something that's a lot of interest at the moment. Involves a lot of components, conservation agriculture, restoring or protecting soil health, integrating crops, livestock, woodland areas and trees, and obviously sequestering carbon, different means of storing carbon in the soil. It's quite complex, and we don't have all the answers to these different components or an understanding totally all these components. But to me, it's probably a lot about good practice, but to a farmer, it's really challenging because it's a lot. It looks a lot on there, it's a lot to a farmer to understand, and they want someone to give them the answers. And potentially we don't always have the answers now that they're requiring, and it'll take time. So, a solution to this is to provide some technical innovation, solutions, information. And we've seen this sort of influx or promotion of precision farming, smart farming, as the solutions to all this, balancing productivity with environmental measures or efficiency and resource use. Precision farming hopefully accounts for temporal spatial variability, gives you that information, could be variable rate applications of nutrients to fields. Smart farming is management of the farm operations using advanced technology. So that could be this interface that brings components together from satellite to ground level measurements to inform, again, how you apply things to your field, join things together. But with increasing productivity and resource efficiency, we need this new information and knowledge. It means that the farmers can make better decisions, make more informed decisions. And importantly, we need these sort of technical solutions, efficiencies that I'll touch on in a minute to be more sustainable and hopefully producing affordable and nutritious food for everybody. It's quite a challenge, and there's such a range of technology solutions that are out there that the market is sort of being bombarded by, and they're trying to decide whether that is useful information, whether it's a useful investment for their business, and they see value in it. And part of our solution to that at Hartpury is hopefully supporting what I call smarter farmers. The smarter farmers are hopefully the innovators, They might be the early adopters or they might be the followers, but hopefully they're the innovators. So we have an agri-tech centre, which literally is a building with 2 rooms. But what it does is it has a network of about 600 farms and 70 businesses that brings people together to share information and hopefully a point where they can get information as well. So it's a sort of a supporting arrangement for people to come together and a point where they can get useful information and hopefully create knowledge and that technical base that we're aiming for. So there could be training involved, there's a network, digital farming network we call it, and outreach activities, seminars and so on, whatever they want and helps them to get the information they need. And again, in terms of this social aspect, bringing people together to gain information, we need not only to support the farmers, but also their connection to the public and the consumers so that they understand where their food's coming from. So we need to, for me, in my eyes, to come up with ways of valuing farming and these sustainable measures. That's quite challenging because they're quite complex biological systems that we're talking about. But that way we can inform policy more directly, putting a value to it and benefits of it. Through these mechanisms, we need to basically reinforce the public understanding of the farms, connect the producer to the consumer, and also give people access. And we're always looking at initiatives to have schools come onto the farm, have open events, engaging events. There's always things we can do more. It's just putting it in place and making sure it works and is suitable, and it's providing useful information. So the diffusion, this is sort of the classic diffusion adoption curve, where hopefully we're supporting these early adopters, which are often the progressive farmers. They're the ones that are always open to new things. They're looking at what can I do, what more can I do? And the followers as well after that, following this sort of sigmoidal curve. And you get this adoption, uptake of knowledge and information, giving them this technical base, putting in the supporting arrangements as well, and hopefully it's integrated, it's giving them information that's useful and how much it's going to cost them, what are the cost benefits, and minimising any risk associated with adoption of this new information. So it's quite challenging because it's obviously got to be very supportive, it's a lot of work, and obviously different groups have different add different value to things. So what level might we be looking at? This could be at different levels, and developments in technology and robotics and things like that are going to a whole new level that we didn't have before. But these supporting arrangements could be at the farm, the landscape level, the farm business. So it could be supportive tools, time management, it could be software, management software solutions, or it could even go to even more precision and the individual plant, the individual animal. And I'll show you a bit of footage of going to that individual animal level and the detail you can then get. So at that level, there's robotics, small robot company and built a robot that takes images of individual plants for individual plant applications. And it's really, we're now going to that level of precision. And what you can then is just be more targeted. Obviously, you can save on resource input, but you're gathering as well information at the same time to inform what you're going to do next. So that can be related to health and performance, which we know are very much important in terms of sustainability and the efficiencies of resource use. So that level of precision is a level we're going to now, and it's becoming increasingly more common as time goes by. So these are some examples of land monitoring of going to a level of precision where we can now do nutrient analysis in real time using one of these mobile spectroscopy devices. And we can use that for plant nutrients as well as below ground soil nutrients. So rather than sending taking a sample and sending it off to the lab. And in soil terms, if you want a full spectrum, you have to wait 2 weeks. We can now do it instantly, in real time. And the benefits of that are you then make the decisions now. You're not waiting. Also, it's a fraction of the cost as well. So I'm a big fan of all these. I like the mobile. It's getting smaller, it's getting more compact, it's more flexible. And in this environment, where you've got obviously fresh forage and grass, which can perish once you've harvested it, you get a more realistic evaluation of its nutrient content. So these are things that are happening now, changing, getting that information. Obviously, it takes time for people to see how it can benefit them, how they might use that information, and inform what they're doing. So we can take this more detailed information, and then we can map it on the field scale using aerial imaging. And obviously, we've got those maps, and we can see over time temporal change, spatial change, and inform how our understanding of that area and our farm as a whole. Grassland management is another one. So following on from that in terms of land information and getting this information, this is some work we did with the National Trust, looking at the effects of grazing in diverse swards. And there's a real part to play for the animal and the plants and the interaction between the two. So the grazing animal, you see an increase in the grass content in the sward and the density of the sward. The animal tends to be selective. It tends to pick out the broadleaf in preference to the grass. Also, it has an influence on the nutrient content of the plant. So the dung and urine going onto the fields, and also the process of grazing, stimulates higher plant nitrate nitrogen levels in the plant. So we see this relationship between the animal and the plant and the influence of grazing habits. In terms of different pastures and swards, mixed swards tended to minimise variability in nutrient concentrations, and that's because of the diversity of different growth patterns of the different plants in that sward. So this was looking at grass and legumes and herbs in a mix to see what benefits potentially that brings. And again, the grazing animal helps you manage the maturity of that grass. So as the grass gets more mature, it tends to become more nutrient deficient, whereas the animal tends to graze it to continually keep it in a vegetative state. So it has a preference for which bits it's grazing, but also it's sort of managing the growth and development of the plant and density of the plant as well. There's also differences between whether it's permanent or temporary grassland, where we looked at invertebrate populations. So we looked at the height of the grass and whether it's permanent or temporary grassland. And permanent grasslands tended to support higher caribou beetle numbers, so ground-dwelling beetles, and then denser taller swards tended to support the ground-dwelling spider population. So these are all things that are quite complex, and it's a lot to take on, but it's useful to understand the dynamics between the animal, the plants, and also other invertebrate populations and biodiversity as a whole in that system. It really is a balance. And that's what I touched on. It really is a balance. And that balance is often hard to understand or monitor. I suppose to go back to the regenerative farming concept, and when you've got so many different components going on that potentially need some understanding and monitoring, it really is quite a challenge to understand all these parts. So the balance, if we're looking at productivity and resource efficiency, is possible, but you need the information to be able to do it and understand where that balance lies. This is some work that we did looking at environmental impacts in dairy cows, and the next sort of examples are around dairy cows, which have had quite a lot of investment in recent years and tend to adopt a lot of the latest technology. So this is sort of identifying what traits associated with the animal were linked to sustainability in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And we're, I suppose they're obvious really, but it was useful to put a value to it. So several of these traits were related to health and fertility, changes in body composition, and ultimately survival of the animal that impacted on the emissions intensity of producing milk. There are some that are very challenging in terms of feed intake and methane, and I'll give you an example in a bit of doing that. Things that we would like to do, but they're very expensive traits to measure and quantify. So there are ways to do it now, but they're not necessarily as a phenotype in the farming environment. So there are lots of different parts that, if we had that information, we could get more informed about the environmental impact of cows in this case, but other livestock species as well. Let's build up this picture. And one really important part of work we did in 2018 was around the importance of survival. So in livestock and breeding animals, yeah, survival has a high value. Obviously, it's linked again to health and fertility, some of those important parts of the animal's well-being. But this was looking at differences among parts of the UK, and we found lower survival rates in cows in Scotland. I don't know if any of you have been in the winters in Scotland, can be quite cold, but it's this difference or information is useful because obviously different breeding decisions have been made and direction going, maybe it seemed to be related to higher productivity selection for milk yield, and that was then impacted on the lifespan and longevity of the animals, which then links then to the need for more replacement animals, and then obviously a higher carbon footprint associated with milk production in that area. The important thing is very much to think about animals moving to their sort of maturity and mature productivity. And in many cases, the drive for increased selection on production, and you see diminishing effects in terms of longevity and survival. So that, again, is coming back to this real balance in the system, the farming system, and just an understanding of that. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, I'll give you an example in a moment of enteric, but a large proportion of emissions are coming in terms of this milk production emissions from enteric fermentation, manure and soils, but also other notable sources are from energy, fertilizer use, concentrate purchase feeds that go into the system. So recognising these different sources of emissions and their contribution can also help us target where we're going to invest in terms of reducing or abating emissions. This is an example that I work on quite a bit, is measuring in breath of in this case, dairy cows again. We can now use the breath analysis techniques to get these individual measures of methane output from individual animals. So we use signal processing to, as you can see here, get these peaks of breath, of methane output in concentrations. Then we can extrapolate that to emission rate per minute and estimate how much methane that animal might produce over a day. This is of interest in terms of methane as a pollutant, but also to give it increased value to the marketplace. There's also an interest in terms of health and well-being of the animal, so the gut health of the animal. We could also measure other biomarkers, such as carbon dioxide or other markers related to health, to get an idea of the health and well-being of that animal. So, but the challenging thing for this is, so this is a picture on the right there of a cow coming to a robotic milking station, and it stands there for about 10 minutes getting milked, and it breathes out, and we detect these peaks in methane, and we can extract that. And it works quite well in that environment, but obviously every farm is different, and you've got to have something that's quite robust to go into different environments and still be repeatable and reliable as a measure. And that is always the challenge with these things, that are more difficult to obtain. So an example, you get all these different profiles of these animals. Some animals are high methane producers, some are low methane producers, and obviously then we can see what is driving their methane output. And in many cases it's diet, but there is a genetic component to it, so there is the potential to select animals on their methane output. But we see a lot of differences among farms, and if we could use this information to not only inform our national inventories, but also be able to, so farms can benchmark themselves against other farms, see how they compare. It increases our ability to monitor and inform the sustainability of that setup. And the farmer may look to alter the diet. He may look to select ultimately on low methane producing cows in the future. Another one here, which is around, we're sort of built on the scarcity of the increase in the number of animals that a farmer has to look after now and monitor. So this is computer vision tracking cows that are due to give birth. And what we can do, so computer vision has come about for a lot of robotic technologies, but this is just using camera surveillance. And it identifies the object, in this case the cow. It can also then be trained to determine its behaviour, whether it's standing, lying, walking, eating, or giving birth. And you really need to find where the need is. So in this case, it helps farmers, cows can give birth or livestock give birth in the day or at night. It can be, obviously they might be doing other tasks in the daytime, and we can get an alert to help them know that cow number 101 is starting to give birth, and to keep an eye on them. And obviously now with your mobile phones, you can follow the cameras on your phone, but you get that alert to give you that warning. And eventually it might tell you whether it needs assistance or not, because it can be quite dangerous when you go into a pen with a cow that's about to give birth. You have to be wary as a stockman or understand your animals and the dangers that might exist. So there was a need, and that, so say there, come from Facebook's Detectron model. So it's also developed from facial recognition, and now it's being used, that same approach, then being developed for other applications, such as this in farming. Another one here is I've touched on already, is robotics. So this has been around, robotic milking stations for 20 years or so. But the need now is it's very hard to get people to milk cows, or skilled labour to milk cows. And but robotics allows you to solve that solution and that need. So it uses kind of flight detection to detect the teats, and then puts the clusters on each teat, you see here. The trouble with this is it changes your working pattern. Robotic milking stations, work 24/7. The cows can be milked anytime, and they find a hierarchy in the herd of when they want to be milked, and they tend to stick to that pattern day after day. The trouble with that is, if it breaks down in the night, obviously the cows still need to be milked, and you get this alert to say, robot such and such is broken down and needs fixing. So someone has to go and sort it out. But yeah, some people are happy to work in that environment, work with robotic milking stations, make that investment, and it works for them. But it doesn't work for every farm, and it's very much whether it works in your farming system. So just to summarise and finish, farming's in a transition. We know that, and hopefully it brings a lot of opportunities and positive change. It's a balancing act, which I hope time will tell whether we get that balancing act right. But again, we need the information to make the right decisions. We've got a new framework coming in. It needs independent support to give the information and develop the knowledge for farmers to improve what they're doing or understand what they need to do. So that technical support, supportive solutions in place. And one that comes out a lot and people keep asking about is how can I achieve net zero? We need systems in place to make the connections. Remember that the farmer wants to connect to other farmers, needs to connect to the public and the people, the consumers that are buying the food product. We need to support the social and environmental value of what we're doing and sustainability of farming. So those are challenges that exist and hopefully sort of come about over the coming years as policy driving will bring back a lot of change. All right, thank you very much. And then any questions?
Excellent, Matt. Thank you very much. We're going to try and manage some hybrid questions as well. So, do we think?
Just stop sharing. Yes. Don't press the red button.
Right. Okay. I think we'll try and be fair. We'll have questions from the room and we'll have questions that Chris can organise online as well. So, should we start off in the room? Questions? I'm sure there are.
Thank you, Matt. Really interesting. I love this mix of the very specific and technical with the much bigger kind of landscape of where we are and how things are changing. I just had a question about the whole business about longevity in dairy herds, because it's clear that there are advantages from a public policy point of view, but at the moment it's clear to me that there are market drivers that are working in that direction. And I don't know whether you sort of talk a little bit about whether you could see ways in which it would become advantageous for people to want to keep cows alive for longer.
Yes, I think that's right. The message is a bit clouded because the longevity issue is very much around, okay, if I bring in younger, hopefully more superior genetics into my herd sooner, I will progress faster as a herd. But that isn't always the case because obviously, genetics makes up maybe a third of the performance of that animal, and the rest is environmental influence. And I think genetics is winning that battle more than the phenotype part, the interaction with the environment and the environmental elements of it, which you sort of see in that sort of study and outcome. Because I think that's right. If farmers, I think it's gradually changing, but obviously you have to bear in mind who's influencing the farmer. And for the farmer, particularly in dairy cows, they obviously get a lot of information about improving their genetics and how that's important and reduce their carbon footprint. But it won't necessarily improve their carbon footprint unless they're improving health and well-being and all those sort of fitness traits we talk about in those animals.
I was wondering if you changed your pricing strategy as a milk buyer, whether that would make a difference to those signals, because at the moment you're paying mostly on volume, and also you're pushing towards, as you said, the higher yield, which has led to the shortening of the...
Yes, so in the UK, that's right, we still price on volume largely, and then some might price it on milk solid. But I think it would be beneficial if we move to pricing on milk solid, but also as well, you're seeing now where there's coming about environmental indexes, which are not the same as what historically was focused on, a more production index, which has now got a bit of more of a balance towards health and well-being of the animal. But still, we still need the measures to inform those genetic indices in terms of some of those health and well-being measures, because those traits have a very low heritability, which is always a challenge, and that's where the phenotypic measures. Hello.
Shall we have an online question online?
Yeah. So I have to
Okay.
Or do you want to look at them all? Do you want to read them out as you see them?
I don't know. Can we speak a bit more about the reasoning behind increasing social connections with the public? What are the benefits? Is there seen as a way to promote the farm's product or something more? Yeah, the social connections is a good one because so there are a lot of initiatives. Obviously, there's Open Farm Sunday. There are things that are there to promote and get people out onto farms. And in the last year, I think, if anything, that's helped our connection with local food supplies. Because like a year ago, I was selling boxes of lamb. So at Sutton Bonington, Nottingham University, the students have a sheep flock and we sell the meat directly. And we got more than ever because people, wanted this box delivered to the doorstep. They saw value in it. So we, have that then connection, and they keep coming back, and we get more and more. So we still a change there, which was induced by COVID and lockdowns, and as people start to look more locally. But it's holding on to that. So it's having that local connection. People then knowing where they can go to get that food in terms of products and markets. And then, but also it's encouraging the connection in terms of getting people out onto farms so they can see for themselves how the food's been produced. When I was in Scotland, they're part of the Royal Highland Education Trust, and they had a good initiative with Tesco. So we're paying for the buses to get the schools out to the farm, and it's great. We just host the schools and the farm and sort of pay for the bus. But sadly, that went away as you can no longer pay for the bus because the bus got more expensive, and then suddenly it brings those things to a halt, and which is really sad. So it really is about how people can connect on a local level to the food that's being produced in the local.
Damien, do you want to go next? And then we'll go back to them.
Yeah, thanks. It's a sort of all over the place question in a way, but I mean, yeah, no, it's really interesting what you're saying. I mean, in a sense, I get the kind of impression I get from your talk is there's a degree of optimism in terms of this process of transition that we might be going along on. Whereas, I mean, I spend most of my life on social media reading stuff about agriculture and food, and often actually it's quite gloomy, particularly at the moment, I would say, in terms of, particularly the future of British farmers. And I was just wondering about your, I don't know, your sort of sense of, is it this optimistic sort of vision that you have really? Because I'm thinking about some of the challenges, particularly for say livestock farmers, that they face, and I wonder, I don't know, do you pick up any of that more gloomy perspective that certainly I've been seeing on sort of,
Yeah, yes, I get it. Well, again, it's coming back to it's a balance, isn't it? Because we pick up. There's a tendency, isn't there, in the media to have some of those sort of gloomier agricultural stories, and again, that's probably very much the farming community in that the progressive ones will be very positive and they'll have solutions in place to combat. They've already got used to volatility. Our farmers are very adaptive, as we know in the last year or so, where you're sort of saying, okay, the market's going to diminish, we're not going to be able to sell our produce, but actually people find a way, they adapt. And it's amazing how sort of resilient they are in that regard. There's been uncertainty for a long time, and obviously uncertainty gets aired in terms of, what can we do to solve this? I think I would like to see more investment in the sustainability measure component, because we've never done that. Like DEFRA, funded some of the initial methane work, but they funded it for an initial period, then it became EU funded, and then it's never become commercial. It's never got out of commercial, they never bought into it. Whereas if you go to the Netherlands, they're all over these things. They're all about sustainability and how can we improve our sustainability.
Yeah.
So different countries, different, priorities in terms of what do we expect commercial companies to invest in and make more widespread in the farming community. Because we're very sort of, we're driven, as I say, to more the animal side, genetics, but again, saving crops as well, selecting the best variety. We have all these variety trials. But what about these, I suppose they're more difficult measures, but we really need to invest in them if we're going to have the technology that we need to get the information we need. Because at the moment we're using technology from other industries like gas emissions. We're using technology that's developed for the energy industry, but as we do as researchers, we then apply it to agriculture and we go, it's not brilliant, but it does the job. And we see these nice results, but we need something bespoke to meet that. And that's one thing we don't do so well at.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, apologies. I mean, it's our fault for our technical delay, but we're going to have to leave the room now because somebody else is waiting to come in. So I'm going to have to cut the question short. Very sorry. And there's one online, which is quite two.